Hi everyone. Today we're diving into chilling stories of people who thought they were safe in the water until shark attacks proved they weren't. From a videographer who spotted a fin closing in and thought the shot was worth staying for, to a spearfisher who clips freshly bleeding fish to her waist until something came straight up and took her in. It was the 18th of July 2016, and New Smyrna Beach in Florida was already crowded by mid-morning. Heat sat heavy over the water, and the surf was unsettled waves coming in fast, the kind that stir sand off the bottom and keep the water churned and brown close to shore. New Smyrna is on Florida's east coast, and people who study sharks know it well. It is not because the water is super dangerous or scary. Most people swim there and are totally fine. It is because the warm, shallow water is a perfect place for small fish to gather, and wherever small fish go, sharks follow to eat them. That morning, a lot of small fish were already swimming near the beach. Lifeguards walked around warning people to be careful because they could see shark fins in the water where the fish were eating. This was normal for New Smyrna, but it was still a real danger. The water was also very cloudy from the waves and sand, so you couldn't see more than 2 feet in front of you. Patricia Driscoll was 27. She worked independently, picking up freelance video work, outdoor content, travel footage, the kind of material that gets packaged and sold. People close to her described someone wired to act first and think second. Not careless in a deliberately dangerous way, but impulsive. The kind of person who sees something worth capturing and moves toward it before pausing to consider what else might be in the frame. That trait had served her well in her line of work. On July 18th, it put her directly in the wrong place. She was at the beach alone that day, phone already in hand, wading out into the water before most people had settled their towels down. By the time she was near the offshore, the surf sat at chest height approximately 4 feet deep. The water around her was murky and active. Baitfish were breaking the surface in scattered bursts nearby, and the combination of wave movement and feeding activity kept everything around her in a constant, low-grade churn. That's when she spotted a curved dorsal fin cutting through the water ahead of her. Lifeguards had already warned everyone. The smart thing to do, in my opinion, would have been for Patricia to walk back to the beach. Instead, she raised her phone to take a video. She assumed the fin belonged to a dolphin. That's not an irrational assumption on its surface. Dolphins and bull sharks share the same coastal feeding water along Florida's east coast. And from chest-deep surf with near-zero visibility, telling the two apart isn't always easy. But the decision that followed is harder to explain. Rather than creating distance, she turned partially away from open water, extended her arm outward, and began framing a selfie aimed at where the fin had been moving. Bull sharks working through a baitfish school aren't targeting people, but they respond aggressively to close-range movement and disturbance in low-visibility conditions, and Patricia was standing in exactly that environment, surrounded by surface activity with less than 2 feet of visibility in any direction beneath her. The shark made contact without any readable warning. A single bite struck across her upper thigh and hip area deep, and with enough force to knock her sideways into the water. She attempted to push back upright, but the shifting sandy bottom and the incoming surf worked against her. Before she could stabilize her footing, the shark made brief secondary contact in the same area, widening the wound further before pulling away into the murk below. Lifeguards reached her within minutes. She was pulled back towards shore and treated at the scene, but the injury itself was the problem. A deep wound to the upper leg in warm, open water produces a rate of blood loss that is nearly impossible to control in field conditions, no matter how fast the response is. Patricia became unresponsive within minutes of being pulled from the surf. She was pronounced dead that day. The official findings confirmed the cause of death as a fatal shark bite resulting in severe blood loss. After my last video, a lot of you said you would never swim in cloudy water again. Reading those comments made me think of Patricia. She was surrounded by rough, dark water, but she still thought she was safe enough to film. The next story showed me that sometimes having people around doesn't change anything, especially when the sun is already going down. It was the 9th of August, 2015, and the Outer Banks of North Carolina was settling into that particular stretch of evening where the heat loosens and the light flattens. Wind had picked up slightly, and small baitfish were breaking the surface in scattered clusters near the shoreline, the kind of low-key feeding activity that's easy to miss if you're not paying attention. The Outer Banks in late summer draws groups of younger people who tend to stay well past the afternoon. By early evening, The main beach crowd had thinned, but clusters of people remained along the water's edge. Cora Kendrick was 22 years old. She was spending her summer break at the beach with friends before heading back to college. Her friends said she always accepted a challenge without thinking, not because she was arrogant, but just out of habit. She was the type of person to say yes before you even finished asking the question. She hated hesitation and didn't want anyone to see her as scared. People loved her for that energy, and it always kept her leading the way in whatever the group did next. I've had friends like Cora, the ones who jump in first, whether it's a road trip or a dare. Sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's risky. As the light continued to fade, the group gathered near the shoreline. At some point, someone suggested swimming out to a sandbar visible roughly 40 yards offshore. The idea moved through the group as those things do, half dare, half low-stakes contest. When it reached Cora, she was already moving toward the water. Honestly, if someone in my group had suggested swimming to a sandbar at that hour, I'd probably have laughed it off. Knowing Cora, she would definitely not hesitate. Stayed closer to shore. People on nearby towels watched her heading out and then lost interest almost immediately. From the beach, it still looked harmless, just another person swimming farther than everyone else. Cora pushed outward through the surf as the sky continued to dim. By the time she reached the deeper section near the sandbar, the water sat at roughly 5 feet deep chest height. She was approximately 40 yards from her friends, treading water and calling back toward them. The bait fish were still active nearby, and the wind-driven churn and incoming wave movement created consistent surface disturbance all around her. In those conditions, Cora's silhouette would have been increasingly difficult to track from the beach. Bull sharks along the Outer Banks coastal waters are most active during warmer months, and low-light conditions reduce surface contrast in ways that draw them closer to disturbances they would otherwise approach more cautiously. Someone treading water at that depth, with bait fish nearby and uneven splashing from wind chop all around them, produces exactly the kind of signal a bull shark will move toward. The shark approached from below and behind, consistent with how bull sharks move through disturbed, low-visibility water. There was no readable surface warning before contact. The initial strike happened fast and low, and witnesses saw her drop under briefly before coming back up. When she resurfaced, something was clearly wrong. She wasn't swimming anymore, she was trying to stay upright. Her movements uneven and confined. Witnesses saw heavy splashing after the first strike, but from shore it became difficult to tell whether she was fighting the surf, injured, or still being contacted by the shark. There was no clear second strike visible from shore, just a widening area of disturbance where she had been. Over the next several seconds, her movements became less coordinated, between the chop, the fading light, and the distance. Friends raised the alarm from shore immediately. Responders arrived and began searching near the sandbar. She was located not far from where she had last been seen, drifting just beyond the break. Cora was recovered shortly after the search began. She could not be revived. The cause of death was confirmed as a shark bite, accompanied by severe blood loss and rapid incapacitation in open surf conditions. Now, what I wasn't prepared for in the next case is that there were people right there too. And it still made no difference, for a completely different reason. It was the 3rd of May, 2017, and Lake Worth Lagoon in Florida was running busy through the afternoon. The lagoon sits between the barrier island and the mainland along Florida's east coast, a narrow, warm stretch of enclosed water that sees heavy recreational traffic during the warmer months. Lake Worth Lagoon is not the open ocean. It is an enclosed, warm body of water connected to the intracoastal waterway. This makes it a busy pathway for all kinds of sea life, including bull shark. People who spent a lot of time on the water were used to seeing fins in the channel. Most of the time, the sharks ignored everything around them. They moved through the lagoon the same way boats did. Just another part of the traffic people stopped paying attention to after enough weekends there. Dave Geller was 34. He spent most of the week indoors, so weekends on the water were his escape. He had ridden jet skis for years, long enough to get comfortable and stop thinking as carefully as newer riders did. Friends said he always pushed the speed and rode a little too close. Not obviously reckless, just faster and closer than necessary. That afternoon, Dave was out on the lagoon, moving through the channel with other riders nearby. He was traveling somewhere between 30 and 35 miles per hour and cut across the path of another rider. The two jet skis made contact. The impact threw Dave off the machine and into the water hard. Witnesses on a nearby boat confirmed they saw him surface and knew immediately something was wrong. He had visible cuts along his left arm and down his side, injuries consistent with the fall and contact with debris. I've been on jet skis a few times, and even at moderate speed, the water feels unpredictable. Thinking about Dave, I can see how easy it is to forget that when you've done it for years. Someone nearby was already calling for help. For the next few minutes, the situation stayed focused on the crash. Dave remained at the surface, struggling to stay steady while others tried to get closer without putting him at risk. What happened next wasn't immediately clear. There was no dramatic surge, just a sudden change in Dave's movement. At some point, a shark was drawn into the area, likely unseen before contact. Given the lagoon's warm, murky conditions and the presence of blood in the water, it was exactly the kind of situation where a bull shark could move in without being noticed. The bite was abrupt. Witnesses didn't clearly see the animal, only that Dave reacted suddenly, as if struck from below. Investigators later noted that this kind of fast, close-range contact is consistent with bull shark behavior in low-visibility water, where they rely more on sudden movement and disturbance than clear sight. Dave went under shortly after that. From nearby boats, it was difficult to tell what had happened in real time. Some thought he slipped under from his injuries. Others realized something more serious seconds later. Responders reached the area quickly, but the channel water was not clear. Blood and debris were visible at the surface, and conditions around the collision site were still disturbed from the jet ski impact. Finding Dave took longer than anyone on scene wanted. He was located in the channel and brought up, but there was nothing more that could be done. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Footage from a camera mounted on a nearby boat was recovered during the investigation. It captured portions of the aftermath, people repositioning, and the confusion following the incident consistent with what witnesses reported. Official findings confirmed the cause of death as a fatal shark bite following severe blood loss, with the collision identified as the event that started the sequence. The thing about Dave's case is that it started with something that had nothing to do with the water. The next case I looked into starts the same way. Something goes wrong before anyone is even in the water, but everything else about it is completely different. It was the 21st of March 2018, off the coast of Key West. The water looked calm and bright blue, but the parasail route crossed a deeper 40 to 60 foot channel where the wind was steadily building. The surface still seemed manageable, which made it feel like a normal day on the water, and that's part of what makes this story unsettling. Boats were still running trips. Riders were still getting clipped in and sent up above the channel. On one of those boats, crew members had already noticed wear on part of the harness assembly earlier in the outing. According to the investigation, it was not enough to stop operations, so the rides continued. Mave Pender was 29. She was visiting Key West as a tourist and worked a regular office-type job back home. People who knew her described someone open, upbeat, and easy to talk into an activity if it meant making the trip feel memorable. Parasailing fit that version of her perfectly. A viewer once said, "The scariest thing about recreational activities isn't the activity itself. It's the person running it." I brushed it off when I read it. Then I found this story and went back and liked the comment because she really made sense. She was lifted to around a lower operating height, well below the higher end of commercial ranges, high enough that the boat below would have looked small and the shoreline farther away than it felt from deck level. As the boat changed direction, the gusts put more strain on the line and the harness system. Somewhere in that shift, the worn section gave way. When the harness failed, there was no slow slide and no real chance to recover. She fell straight from the parasail into the water below. A drop from that height is still dangerous, but more survivable than an extreme fall, and witnesses saw her hit hard. She did come back to the surface, but not in any controlled way. People on the boat said she looked badly disoriented, moving unevenly and splashing as if she was trying to figure out where she was and how to stay up. Several seconds passed, with only the sound of the boat turning back toward her and the water settling from the impact. What happened next was observed more clearly by multiple people on the boat. A large shape moved just beneath the surface near her position, followed by a sudden, forceful disturbance. Witnesses described a single direct strike consistent with a predatory approach. Based on the size, movement pattern, and the location, investigators later identified the animal as an oceanic white-tip shark. The oceanic white-tip shark is a large, open ocean predator known for its long, rounded fins with white tips that stand out in the water. It is often described as bold and opportunistic, especially in deep offshore areas where encounters with struggling prey can quickly draw its attention. Investigators focused on the fall itself. A sudden drop from that height can cause severe internal trauma, even if the person briefly resurfaces. Disorientation, loss of coordination, and rapid physical decline are consistent with that kind of impact. The parasailing boat reached the area within moments, but those moments were enough. Crew members got back to where she went down and found disturbance on the surface, scattered gear, and no stable sign of her. By the time they reached her position, there was no realistic window left for a rescue to change the outcome. In the end, investigators determined that the fall and resulting injuries were the primary cause of death. While some details of her final seconds could not be fully reconstructed, there was no confirmed evidence pointing to any external factor beyond the equipment failure and the impact itself. That uncertainty is limited to timing and sequence, not cause. If there's a lesson here, I think it's that just because someone else is handling the danger doesn't mean the danger is gone. When the weather starts changing and the equipment is wearing out, the person strapped into that harness is the one who suffers if someone makes the wrong call. For me, this story lingers because Mave never really had a choice. The next case bothered me for a different reason. It started at the shoreline with something that should have been easier to walk away from. It was the 12th of June 2015, and the shoreline along Gulf Shores, Alabama, was holding the kind of late afternoon heat that pulls people out toward the surf rather than away from it. The beach was full of people fishing that day. They stood in the shallow water, reeled in small fish, and talked quietly. Everything felt calm and easy. Because it was so peaceful, nobody expected what happened next. When something goes wrong in a place that quiet, it happens so fast you can barely believe it. Brent Vance was 41. He had a steady job back home that kept him on a regular weekday schedule, and shoreline fishing was the thing he saved his weekends for. People who knew him described someone proud of his skill on the water, not loud about it, but quietly competitive. He used heavier tackle than most of the guys around him, and he liked landing fish other people couldn't. His friends said he was the kind of fisherman who would stand in one spot for hours if it meant winning a fight with whatever was on the other end of his line. Late in the afternoon, Brent hooked something big. Whatever it was started thrashing hard out past the break, and from the way the rod was bending, it was clear this was not an average catch. His friends nearby saw the same thing. They could see turbulence farther out water moving in a way that didn't match the chop around it. More than one of them told him to cut the line. He didn't. To keep tension on the line, he stepped from 3 feet of water into a deeper 5 to 6 foot section near the Gulf Shores drop-off. A few steps there can put you off the shelf and unable to brace against a strong pull. The hooked fish kept bleeding as it fought, leaving a visible trail in the water, the kind that carries. A tiger shark moving along that drop-off would not have needed any introduction to that scene. A wounded, thrashing fish bleeding in warm coastal water is one of the clearest signals in the ocean. Tiger sharks are opportunistic by nature, and that part of the Gulf is a known corridor for them during the summer months. According to friends watching from the beach, the shark came in from deeper water and took the hooked fish in a single hard pull. The rod jerked forward so violently that Brent was pulled off balance immediately. He didn't let go. I fish, but I'm not as good as him. Still, I know how it feels when a big fish pulls on the line. To be honest, I think I would have held on too. That is the scariest part of the story for me. The shifting sand under his feet was already working against him, and the deeper water meant he had nothing solid to plant against. As the line stayed live and the shark stayed on the fish remains, Brent was pulled farther out. Witnesses said his hands and forearms got caught up in the struggle line, rod, and movement, all happening at once in shallow surf that was no longer shallow for him. Heavy tackle is built to handle force, not to release it gracefully. When the pull is bigger than the angler is what gives way. He let go of the rod eventually, but by then he was already off the shelf and in trouble. The shark, the fish, and the bleeding water were all in the same close space he was trying to back out of. Contact with him came in the middle of that turbulence. His friends described the surface going chaotic, then watched him go under. He did not come back up. The whole thing, from the first hard pull to the moment they lost sight of him, played out faster than any of them could react from the beach. A friend pulled the now slack line back in from the beach a short time later. That line is part of what investigators worked from, along with phone video from another person on shore that caught the rod bending hard toward deeper water in the last seconds before it disappeared under the surface. None of the footage showed a clean shot of the shark itself, but the sequence was consistent with everything the friends described. Recovery crews searched the immediate area along the drop-off and located him later that evening in deeper water, well past the point where he had originally been outstanding. The official findings confirmed Brent's death as a fatal shark-related incident, with the primary cause listed as catastrophic injury and drowning in deeper water after losing footing during the line struggle. No beach closures were issued afterward. The findings were filed, and the stretch of shoreline stayed open the next morning. A small advisory was posted about handling hooked fish during active feeding conditions, but most beachgoers passed it without reading. How many of those beach advisories have you walked past without reading? Be honest. For me, what makes Brent's story sit so heavy is that he had every chance to step back. His friends said it out loud. The water was telling him he chose the rod. The next case I looked into doesn't give the victim that kind of warning at all, and somehow that made it harder to write about, not easier. It was the 10th of April, 2016, and the water off Bimini was doing what it always does this time of year, sitting bright, clear, and almost too calm to take seriously. From the deck of a small tour boat, the surface looked like glass. You could see straight down into shifting blue, the kind of clarity that makes people forget how deep open water really is. The weather was warm, the wind was light, and the conditions were exactly what a shark-feeding excursion would advertise. Postcard conditions. That detail matters, because nothing about the setting that afternoon felt like a warning. It felt like the start of a vacation memory. Bimini sits just off the Florida coast and has built a small industry around getting tourists close to bull sharks. The pitch is simple: a boat, a guide, bait in the water, and a controlled experience with animals most people only ever see on a screen. It feels managed. It feels safe. The boats are small, the crew handles the bait, and you stay on board. That sense of structure is what people are paying for. Whether it actually protects them is a different question, one that doesn't get asked until something goes wrong. Holly Beck was 26. She worked in a customer-facing role back home and used vacations to do the kinds of things that filmed well. People who knew her described someone outgoing, drawn to experiences with a story behind them, and comfortable in front of a camera. She was not careless. She had grown up filming everything, and the closer she could get, the better the footage. Friends said she had been excited about this trip for months, especially the shark excursion, talking about it often before the trip. That instinct is what put her at the railing that afternoon. The crew dropped bait into the water shortly after the boat anchored. Within minutes, bull sharks started moving in. Witnesses said there were several, circling tight to the boat, breaking the surface in fast passes near the bait. Passengers leaned in along the railings to film. That part is normal on these trips. The boat is the safe zone. The water beside it isn't. Holly worked her way to the edge with her phone out. She wasn't the only one filming, but she was leaning the farthest. Other passengers confirmed she was extending her arm well past the rail to get a cleaner angle into the bait zone. Then the boat shifted. I've seen people act like that before. When you take a video, you only look at the screen. You forget about the railing, the water, how far down it is. You lose track of everything else. It wasn't dramatic, just the kind of small movement a boat makes when people shift or water rolls under it. But she was already past her center of gravity. Witnesses said she went over the rail in one motion, phone first, body following. She landed directly in the active bait zone alongside the boat. No slow slide, no chance to grab the rail. From above, it looked like she tipped out of frame. A bull shark already feeding less than 10 feet away redirected almost immediately toward the splash. That isn't unusual. It's exactly what bull sharks do when sudden movement enters a feeding area. Initial contact came at close range. The bite appeared singular but severe, striking her upper body and arm and forcing her under in one motion rather than a prolonged attack. The water around her churned and darkened fast. The water around the bait zone became chaotic enough that witnesses struggled to tell where Holly was in the turbulence. Passengers shouted from above, and crew moved immediately along the side of the boat, trying to reach her as quickly as possible. There were brief glimpses of movement near the surface, but no clear repeated attack pattern, just confusion, splashing, and loss of visual contact. Then the surface closed over with turbulence, and for several seconds nobody could see her. The deck went from phones raised to people frozen in place. The crew managed to pull her back onto the boat. By that point, the injuries were too severe to manage with anything on board. She did not survive the trip back to shore. The boat radioed in, but the realistic window for intervention had already closed. Multiple passengers had been filming when she went over. That footage became the core of the investigation. It captured the lean, the shift, the fall, the initial contact, and the response. Investigators didn't have to guess, it was recorded from multiple angles. Authorities questioned operators about positioning, railing height, and proximity to feeding zones. Findings cited the bait operation, the close circling of sharks, and Holly's position over the rail as central factors. No charges were filed. Excursions continued, with stricter positioning rules added afterward. If I were on that boat, phone out, sharks below me, I'd like to think I'd stay back. But I've seen my own footage. I'm leaning further than I remember. I'm not sure I'm any different.